Today's topic is scheduling events. We'll walk you through kind of the different ways to schedule events, what the different event types are in Arbiter that you can schedule, and then the different things associated to an event once it has been scheduled. So the officials and the event workers. That is actually where we're going to start today is those officials and the event workers. To get to the officials and event workers tabs, you'll go to the people tab. And you'll see here you've got two subtabs for workers and officials. One thing I mentioned in yesterday's session was if you do not have permissions to some of these tabs, it's probably due to your access level. So if there are tabs that I'm showing you today that you seem to not have permission for, it is probably related to that access level. But this is the workers tab. This is where you would come to add any workers that you were going to add to any events. So this could be a ticket taker, concession stand worker, security guard, and maybe your school has an elevator operator at a football stadium, a parking lot attendant, really anyone and everyone that is associated with an event. Or that helps put on that event. They can be added here as an event worker, scheduled to those events, and they will receive assignment notifications for those events, and then any assignment changes to those events. If there was a time change, they would receive assignment notifications for those as well. And then we'll show you in just a sec, but you have a way to have the event workers flow to your pay screen just like they would if they were an official and you were paying them through Arbiter Pay, or you can choose to not have the event worker flow to your pay screen by marking them as a contract or event worker employee of the school. Sorry. So to go and add a new worker, you'll come here to the green new worker button, and you can either import your workers, which importing your workers, you'll pull a downloadable template from Excel, and you'll basically enter the first and last name of those event workers and the email address in order to add them to the system. It may make you put in a address as well, but you could always put in a school address if you needed to, and they could go in and actually update that in their profile later on if they needed to. But importing workers will save you some time if you've got multiple campuses that you needed to add workers to. I'd suggest pulling this template, adding all the workers that could be working at all the campuses into that template, and then you could just download that template into each one of the different campuses that you're responsible for and save you some time. You can also come here and just click add new worker to add an individual worker. You can come here, enter their email address, click OK. If that worker is already in the Arbiter system, it will pre-populate their information, their first name, last name, and address. If they are not in the system, you will be required to enter any required fields. So first name, last name, and address. The other part of this that you're going to have to make sure you do is up here, you've got the type option, and you've got two options here, contractor or employee. If you mark a event worker as a contractor, you intend to pay that event worker through the Arbiter Pay system. So when you assign that event worker to the game, they're going to get that game notification. And because you marked them as a contractor, they're also going to flow to your payment screen for payment. If you mark them as an employee, you're basically telling the system you still want to be able to assign them to games. They're going to receive those assignment notifications, but they're not going to flow to your payments screen because you may pay them through some other form of payment outside of Arbiter. So that's one thing to note there when setting up your workers is you will need to specify a type. I have gotten the question, if I've got school employees that I want to pay through Arbiter, do I mark them as a contractor or an employee? If you intend to pay them through Arbiter, you would need to mark them as a contractor, even if they were a school employee. So then once you add them, you'll click create new worker. It will add that worker to your workers list. A few additional things about this workers list. You do have the ability to email workers. So you can come here and click on individual workers, or if you wanted to select all, you could, and click this action button, and you can email the event workers directly from this page as well. So if you needed to get a hold of the event workers for some reason, maybe let them know that they needed to set up an Arbiter Pay account, or that you guys were having maybe a meeting before the school year started that they had to attend, you could email them directly from here. And then you can also filter, look up specific event workers. The next thing is officials. So adding officials to this officials column would really only need to be done if these officials were being assigned by the school. Otherwise, those officials are flowing over from the assigner. So yesterday we talked about setting up an assigner to a team. Under those teams, you can set up an assigner default, which sends those games related to that team over to the assigner for assignment of officials. And those officials flow over to your scheduled page. And then if you're paying, they flow to your payment screen as well. These officials that you would add into this officials tab here would be those that are assigned by a school. A lot of times we'll see those in maybe events like cross country or track or golf, bowling, maybe some of those more individual sports where an assigner is not the one responsible for the officials. It's a school and they may be using some local guys, but they want to add them here as officials. Similar type process as adding event workers. You can add them one by one, or you can import officials using the import template. So I'm not going to walk through that process since it's kind of the same there. One thing you do have to do when you add officials is choose the sports that they can officiate for. So you can either do that here on this page or during the process of adding an official. You'll also get a step where you choose which sports, but you just come down here and if you were going to need to assign Brandon Aiken to a particular sport, you would choose that sport, select it, and that would let you assign that official to that sport when we get to the schedule page. So that is adding officials to your dashboard. And you also have the option to email those officials if that was something you did want to do. All right, so we've got our officials added. We've got our event workers added. Now we're ready to start adding some events. We'll jump over to the schedule page. And there are a couple different types of events that we can add within Arbiter. We've got the option to add a new game, a new practice, a new meet, a new tournament, or new other event. New other event is primarily used for non-athletic events, maybe a band concert, a choir concert, a theater production. Maybe it's a after school program, whatever it may be. You can use this new other event here, give that event a title, specify a specific location for that event. If it's a recurring event, you can set that up, or if it's a single event, you could set that up here. Over here, you've got a couple different options to specify the status. This published status here, and I'll bring this up when we're talking about some of the other events in just a sec. But this publish event status here basically just means, do you want this event to be published on the public-facing platforms? Arbiter's got a few public-facing platforms. We've got our mobile app as well as Arbiter Live. We'll cover those in Thursday's session of this back-to-school webinar series. But basically, this is, do you want to send that event over to that public-facing platform? It would show up for the public to see on the calendar related to that school. The event type for events here, you would just choose what that specific event type might be. So band, if you had event notes, you could choose that. And then you'll see this facility request and transportation request on all of the events as well. These will apply if you choose to use some of our transportation request and facility request integrations. We currently integrate with Brightly, formerly School Dude, for some of that stuff. So if you've got a Brightly account, you can integrate it with Arbiter, or you can simply add your facility director, transportation director, have them be involved in this process as well if they needed to request certain things in relation to the facility or request certain things in relation to transportation, like buses, bus companies, the cost, And there are reports available for both of these things as well. So if you needed to pull some facility related reports or transportation related reports, you can do so. And those can be found under your reports tab. So the first type that I showed you here was creating those or other events, which usually apply to non-athletic events at your school. The other options, you've got game, practice, meet, and tournament. You've also got the option to import games. Importing games is going to be probably your quickest and easiest way to load schedules in mass. So you will want to use the import template that we provide. You'll even get this little pop-up here that says you need to use the import template that we provide. That's because it pulls information that we've set up in your account. So yesterday when we covered setting up your teams or setting up your sites or setting up your opponents, this import template will look at those different lists that you've set up. So it's important that you do use this template that we provide. If you were to try and use your own Excel template and upload it, your games would fail to import. So once you pull that import template, it is going to look something similar to this Excel file right here. You've got columns across the top that tell you what each column represents, and then which ones of the columns are required for you to enter some data. So you've got published column, a game type column. These are both new columns that you can use if you wanted to mark whether a game's published and sent over to that public facing platform. You've got your different game types that we offer: league game, a non-league game, scrimmage, a tournament game, or a postseason game. You'll want to throw in the date here. It'll show you how to put the date, time, the team. It'll look at your team's list, so that's why it's important you use this template. You choose a home or away. Your opponent's list will also look at your opponent's list that you've got set up under your dashboard. And you kind of just keep going from left to right. One column that I wanted to point out that's really important to pay attention to is this assigned by column. This assigned by column is one you're going to want to make sure you fill in, especially if you're sending these games over to an assigner for assignment. If that is the case, you want to select this option here, Arbiter 1 Assigner. It will look at the default assigning group that the particular team has set up. So if I was assigning for a baseball team here, it would look at whatever assigning group I had set up as the default for that baseball team. And when you import it, it will send this game over to that assigner for assignment of officials. So once you got all your columns filled in, you would save that, and then you could come back in here and upload it, and it would import those games. So that's going to be your best option there if you wanted to load a bunch of different team schedules really quickly and import those. That'll get the trick done probably the quickest. The other way to add games is by adding them one by one or individually. You can do that by clicking right here on New Game, and it will bring you to the New Game screen or Create Game screen. You have the option to give that game a title. It is not a required field by any means. The next step is choosing the different teams involved in this. So you choose your team first, and then from there you'll choose your opponent. I did mention in yesterday's session, but in order to choose an opponent in a game, they must first be added to your opponent's list, which can be done under the Resources tab. There's an Opponents sub-tab. You got to add them there first before you can add them in a game. Once you add your opponent, you would select the where, so either home or away. If you select home, it will look at the different sites that you've got added under your sites list. So also talked about that yesterday. That's something you're going to want to do when you first set up your account. The next thing is the when. So you'd select your date, start time, and then duration of that particular event. Here's that publish and game type status that I've previously talked about. If you're wanting to send it over to the fan-facing platform, you'd mark it as yes. If not, you'd mark it as no. You've got your different game type options here. And then this option right here for bypassing Smart Scheduler. I didn't get into the Smart Scheduler tool, but I can cover that a little bit later on. But basically what that is you can set up a rule on a particular team that when you add a game using that team, it will create any additional games that you've got set up using a Smart Scheduler rule. So I could set up a Smart Scheduler rule in this case to where if I added a boys varsity game, I've got a rule that says anytime I add a boys varsity baseball game, also add a JV game 2 hours before on the same day at the same site with the same opponent. Or maybe it's basketball where I wanted to create the girls games opposite site of the boys games, but at the same time against the same opponent. You can set up those type rules using Smart Schedulers, and I'll briefly touch on that if we've got time at the end, but that can be found under resources and teams. And that can also save you some time in scheduling. You can always create those Smart Scheduler rules, create a game for one team, and when you create that one game, it creates 4 or 5 other games using those Smart Scheduler rules. So if we don't have time to cover that, I'd highly suggest going and checking that out, and it will save you some time if you do choose to add games one by one. Here's the facility request again. If you don't use a facility request, it's not something you've got to fill out every time. You can either uncheck it or you can just leave it as is and it won't hurt anything. The official section down here when creating a game is another important step. Just like on the import template where it was important to identify how your officials were being assigned, the same applies to when you're creating a game one by one. In this assigned by column, you're going to want to identify if this is assigned by a particular assigning group, and if so, what that assigning level may be, or if it's assigned by a school, which meant that you as the school were actually making the assignment of the officials. Or in some cases, there may just not be officials required for the game at all, and you could identify that there. Finally, you've got this participation and breach fees down here. This really only applies to a few of our states where contracts come into play, and if certain people don't show up, then they've got to pay a participation fee on tournaments, and they've got breach fees. We've got help articles for that. I'm not going to go into that too much because it doesn't really apply for most of our states. You do have the option to either just create that one individual game or create game in new. If you create game in new, it'll just drop you back onto this page for you to create another game. If you create game here, it'll drop you back onto this schedule page. All right, the next option is practices. Practices we can either set up in bulk or set up an individual practice. You'd select a team, select a site. If you had a default site set up, it'd pre-populate. And then you could select a win, so either single practice or recurring practices. And then you've got those same options here for facility transportation. The next option is the meet option. The best way to describe a meet is a one-time event that contains multiple opponents. So track meet, a swim meet, cross-country meet, bowling meet, where it's kind of a one-time event, and maybe you're competing as a team in that one-time event, or every individual is competing against one another in that one-time event. But what you can do here is add your team. So maybe this is a cross-country. Then you will add your opponent. And as we add our first opponent, we get the option to add additional opponents. So it's really kind of the same format as creating a game, with the only exception being you can add the multiple opponents here because meets are usually a one-time event containing multiple opponents. So that's that option for you. Everything else, same as it would be for creating a game, so I won't go into that. Just wanted to show you this creating additional opponents on a game. Then the last option we've got here is a tournament option. This is going to be an event with multiple matchups containing multiple teams. You are required to give a tournament a specific name. So maybe it's a memorial tournament or a foundation tournament. You can put that name here in the title box. You'll come here, you'll select your start date of that tournament and your end date, start time and end time. You've got a publish tournament option, default game type option for that tournament. If you leave those blank, this one will default to a tournament game type since it is a tournament you are building. You'll choose a specific sport for that tournament and a specific level for that tournament. The next thing you'll do is set up the officials part of that tournament. Whoops, chose the wrong team there. And if this tournament does require officials, you'll select the specific assigning group and then the specific level of that tournament. And you would click Create Tournament down here in the bottom right-hand corner. When you do that, it's going to basically build the framework of your tournament. And now you're ready to kind of add the different pieces. So you've got your sites section, your team section, and your game section. Start off by adding all the different sites that may be associated with this tournament. So if it's a multi-site tournament, you would make sure to add those multiple sites here. In order to add sites, they must first be added to your sites list. So if you were going to host a multi-site tournament and you didn't have those sites in this list, you would need to go add them under your sites list first, and then you could come in and add them as a site to the tournament. Select a site here. Next thing you'll do is add the different teams. So here's your teams list. This is also going to pull from your opponents tab. So in order for them to show up here, they must be on under your opponents tab first. So you'll add the different teams, click save. It'll show you that those two teams have been added. Now those teams can accept the contract, which would just be them acknowledging this tournament. And then you'd be ready to add the games for that tournament. The nice thing about a tournament builder and arbiter is you can add a lot of games at one time. So maybe we had 6 games on one day in our tournament with it starting at noon. Maybe each one of those games is an hour long, and you click and you got 30 minutes break between each game. If you click save, it'll actually create all 6 of those games using kind of those parameters you just set up. So the hour-long games with 30 minutes in between, and it will set all those games up. And then you could either leave it as TBA, or if you knew the different matchups in your tournament already, you can come in here, click the pencil, and select the different home and away teams for each one of the matchups. And then as that tournament advances, if you needed to update matchups with the teams that have advanced, you could do so by editing those games and adding the different teams to the games. So that is building a tournament. So once you've got all your events built, they're all going to flow to this schedule screen here. This is kind of where you're going to probably start most of your days, is coming to your schedule screen. And you may look over at this calendar on the left-hand side. And any dates that you've got highlighted in blue is a date that you've got an event. So if we were coming in here, looks like we don't have any events for the next 3 days, but if we wanted to come in here for Friday, look at what we've got going on, click on that particular date, it'll bring up just that particular date's events and kind of give us a running list of what those events are for that day. You can also choose these filters over here on the left-hand side. The first filter is going to be kind of a time filter. So this month is what we want to look at. The second one's going to be a sports filter. So if you wanted to look up a particular sport. Third is going to be a specific level. So if you wanted to look up a specific sport and level, you could do so. And then this last option is one we've added within the last couple months, and it is for the status of the contract. So there is a contract related to each event, either not accepted, pending, or accepted. Not every one of our schools uses the contracts. Sometimes it's mandated by the state, other times it's not. Contracts are basically used as a way to acknowledge games, acknowledge changes on games. That way schedules are accurate and teams don't accidentally make a change on a game and it shouldn't have taken place. And in some cases, you can accept on others' behalfs. We talked about that yesterday a little bit. But if you are curious about those contracts, we've got help articles on contracts that will provide a little bit more information. Once you've got your filters all set up over here and you've got your list of games, a few things to note about the schedule page. Starting from right to left, if you have transportation requests set up, you're going to see a little bus over here in that column, and it will show you the different transportation requests if you click the drop down related to that event. The next one here is the facility request. So if there are facility requests related to an event that needed looking at, you would see that in this column here. The next column you see is the event worker column, which I'll scroll back up here. But this is where you would come to add those event workers that we added earlier. So to add an event worker to a game, you can come in here, click Add Event Worker. It'll look at that list of event workers that you've already added. You can click on the name of multiple event workers or just one. Choose an amount that that event worker would get paid, and then choose the specific worker type of that event worker. We did add a few additional worker types this summer, so check out that list and you may see some that you have been wanting that we have added. Once you do choose the specific worker type, you can click Assign, or if you had chosen multiple, you could click Assign All down here, and it will assign all of those event workers at one time to that particular event. When you do assign them to that event, they're going to get an email pretty quickly letting them know of their assignment to that event. It will contain the instructions on that event, the different details related to it. And then if there were any changes made to the game, they would receive those changes in notification as well. The next column is the officials jersey icon column. So if you wanted to see who your officials were for a game, or if you were a school that was assigning your officials for a game, this is where you would go, is to the officials jersey icon, and you would click it. And if they were being assigned by an assigner, you would see the assigning group listed on this top line. Second line would show you who the assigner that made the assignment was. And if you needed to get in touch with them, you could always click their name and it would show their contact information. And then this third line right down here is actually one we've just added within the last couple of weeks, and we will now display the payer responsible for payment of the officials on the game. So if you click the drop down, you're going to see the payer listed now. The three options you would see there are either the school or association that's listed as the bill to, which means that they're the ones responsible for payment. It will say no payer set if there's currently no bill to on the game, in which case you would need to contact the assigner, and the assigner could put the correct bill to on that game. Or it will say payer set as the assigner. In some cases, the assigner is responsible for payment of officials, and we want you to know that. So those are going to be the three statuses you see there, and we do give you this little tooltip to contact the assigner if that needs to change. You see your different officials listed here, the fees associated with those officials, and then if you needed to print off a voucher for those officials to sign in. If they were assigned by an assigner, you can do so here. You've also got reports available to you that are basically the same thing. It's called the payment voucher report, and you can print off the vouchers, and instead of going event by event and printing those off, you can actually do like an entire week's worth of vouchers. So that would save you some time instead of going into each game, clicking print voucher, downloading that and printing it. You can do so in bulk using the reports that we've got. The other thing you may see under the officials was, like I said, if you assign the officials yourself as the school, it's a little bit different look here. You would come in here, you click assign. It's going to look at the officials that you've added under that officials tab I showed you earlier. You could click the official you wanted to assign, update their fees here, click assign, and it would throw them on the game here. And you can see that status and information there if you needed to. The last column here is that contract column that I talked about. That's really you kind of acknowledging the different details related to that game. If the details are true, you'd want to accept that contract. If the details were not true, you'd want to decline that contract. Or the yellow state means that those changes are pending by one of the other parties related to that game, either the assigner or the opponent on the game. The last thing I'll point out here is our scoring. We do allow scoring on all of our events, and those scores do flow throughout our Arbiter system. So they're going to flow to the payment or the public-facing platforms of Arbiter Live and Arbiter Mobile. They'll also flow over to the assigner's end and the official's end. So it's kind of whoever puts the scores in will kind of flow for everyone, but schools can modify those scores if they need to. And then there are some cases that we know of where maybe a low score wins, or maybe that game doesn't count towards the record, and you may need to modify that information. You can always expand the score details and actually mark the winner on a particular game, or identify if that game does not count towards your win-loss record. Those win-loss records can be found on the team schedule report that's under your reports tab, and they can also be found in our Arbiter Live platform. So if you didn't want the game to count on your win-loss record, you'd select this option here. That is kind of an overview of getting things ready to schedule events, scheduling the actual events, and then once you've got the events on your schedule, kind of managing those events from there. One other quick note that I'll make is to edit an event that you've already added to your schedule. You'll click on that event and it will take you to an edit game screen where you can modify the details related. Click save game. It will ask you who you want to notify of those changes, and that's when you would choose who to notify, whether it's the assigners, the event workers, the Arbiter Live followers, or the fans, the opponent, those sort of things. But you do have the ability to edit games in some cases if you have the correct permission sets. So most of what I showed today, at least viewing the schedule, is something that every person has within Arbiter, is the ability to view their schedule. Some of you may have limited permissions when it comes to some of the other things we did discuss today. Going to look at the chat now to see if we've got any questions we can answer. If you were needing to, I see one about updating transportation. You can mass update your events or update individual events by clicking the checkboxes next to those events. And you've got this action button here. And you've got a couple different options to kind of mass update those different events, whether it be the game status. I know when COVID was flying through schools, a lot of things were getting canceled left and right. So things were needing to be updated en masse with cancellation statuses. Maybe you wanted to publish en masse, update contracts en masse, update transportation or facility en masse. You would click the checkboxes next to those events and click those options there to do so in bulk.